This is something that I've talked about before, and I tried to rationalize it like, maybe since they're working smaller venues where the crowds might not be all that great, that TNA's production crew making the arena so dark that you can't see the crowd is just something they need to do to conceal certain things. Maybe it's a necessary evil. As it turns out, that is not the case. TNA, you're on the Maximum Impact Tour in the UK in front of the biggest crowds you draw all year. You were very eager to boast on social media that you're in a big arena with a big attendance. So for crying out loud, turn the damn house lights on so we can actually see it! Would you have known by watching this show that there were thousands of fans in attendance here? I wouldn't have. I turn on Impact, I see the people in the floor seats, and the rest of the Hydro Arena is pitch black. It's almost as if they're trying to hide the fact that thousands of fans came to see their show. Why on earth would you not want the people watching at home to see that? If it's a small venue, okay. But when you're in a big arena, that's just shooting yourselves in the foot. Because when you do this, you're taking the main thing that sets the UK tour apart from every other show you run all year, and you make it look like you're back in the States wrestling in front of a few hundred people. You take a series of shows that are supposed to look like really huge special events, and you make them look small. What the hell are you doing?
You people are fools!
And that was a question I was asking myself a lot during this show. Not that there was any inexplicable Russo-esque craziness going on here, quite the opposite actually. The truth is, this Impact felt surprisingly mundane. And considering this was week 1 of the Maximum Impact Tour, that's probably not a good sign. It felt like the creative team was backtracking here, foregoing any real significant story developments in favor of a very simplistic and straightforward wrestling show. And as I explained a number of times during the end of their run on Spike, that kind of show in 2015 is just not very compelling. We've got Angle and Lashley making nice in the opener, and they're getting along really well even though Angle isn't shy about wanting a title shot. The BDC come out, and they're all butthurt about losing Lethal Lockdown last week. But the thing is, there's no real reason for them to be upset. There was nothing on the line in Lethal Lockdown, nothing at stake for the winners or the losers, so the outcome of that match was essentially meaningless. But the BDC are pissed off regardless, and we wind up with a tag match main event. A 5-year-old could see where this was going by that point, but the current creative team seems to have an occasional blind spot when it comes to things like predictability. We get a number of fairly run-of-the-mill segments after this, some of which did not feel like the writers were trying very hard. They do Rude vs. Aries for the right to come out last in a battle royal for a title shot next week. It's a fine bout. Rude wins and congratulates Aries on a great match because apparently Rude is dead set on making his babyface character as bland as humanly possible. Dear TNA, please give Bobby Roode his personality back. But before Aries and Rude start making out, or Rude launches into another I love pro wrestling more than you do speech, Eric Young puts a stop to the love fest and pile drives Rude twice. You know, they are doing a good job with EY's new heel character right now, but pile drivers make me uncomfortable. I really wish they'd ban that move. That aside, this was effective in putting heat on Eric, but I thought we'd kind of finished this feud off last week. Isn't Lockdown supposed to be the big climax where rivalries are finally ended? Not anymore apparently, because this feud is still going on. Now I guess Lockdown is just a regular Impact with a steel cage theme and nothing really eventful or climactic about it. Wow. What a great way to undercut what used to be your second biggest show of the whole year, TNA. Nice job.
This is how the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Bram destroys Crazy Steve in a match and calls out Magnus, but Magnus isn't there. Seemed like they could have made more out of that situation. Then Madison Rayne comes out and reminds everybody that she's one title reign away from being the most decorated knockout ever, and that there's no one in the knockout locker room that can beat her. But she has been beaten by several of the other knockouts on Impact quite recently. I don't know if the writers just forgot about that little detail, but, yeah, that's a bunch of bullshit, Madison.
Shut the hell up!
Then Awesome Kong shows up and obliterates her. which I admit I did find very satisfying. Thank you, Kong. Yes! See, one of the nice things about Kong being back is that the rightful knockout pecking order has finally been restored. I've always said that if Kong had not left the company in 2010, that the interminable, god-awful year where the knockout division revolved around Madison Rayne would never have happened. Because when you have someone like Kong, who is as believable as a dominating badass female character gets, it suddenly becomes a hell of a lot harder to pass off other women as top-tier knockouts if they don't have the goods. In this case, put her in there with Kong for 60 seconds and you completely expose Madison Rayne as the glorified utility player she's always been. Against an opponent like Kong, she is just not a believable threat in any way, shape, or form. So I don't know why they bothered having Madison talk about being the Knockouts champion here, because there is absolutely no reason for that to ever happen again. Matt Hardy gives the crowd an update on Jeff, who can't travel to the UK because of reasons. The Revolution get in his face, they beat him up, and the Wolves come out to save him. Again, very simplistic and straightforward, but James Storm elevated this segment with his excellent mic work here. It seems like a really small detail, but the fact that Storm says he did something to Jeff Hardy that no one else has been able to do, and actually uses guys like Edge and Christian and even The Undertaker as examples, gave this a lot of extra weight. You make it feel more real when you go out of your way to mention Jeff's real history with guys from the other company, and I really like that TNA are not afraid of doing that. They can mention WWE or ROH and things that happened there, and that's okay. It can even be a storytelling device, as opposed to the WWE's philosophy of, if it didn't happen under our umbrella, then it never happened. That's dumb. Oddly enough, the most memorable match on the show this week had very little to do with the wrestlers. EC3 and Tyrus versus Rockstar Spud, Mandrews. That's the guy who won British Boot Camp 2, by the way. And yes, Jeremy just bald Borash. EC3 is working injured and Tyrus kinda sucks. And they were the aggressors for most of it, so you can probably guess how this went. It was more fun when the babyfaces were doing things other than getting beaten down, but the real highlight of the match, and the show in my opinion, was JB doing that amazing dive off the turnbuckle to the floor. That was fantastic and hilarious. It looked like he landed kind of hard, but big kudos to JB. He's not a wrestler or anything, but I mean, damn, he really went for it. See, that's the kind of memorable moment that you ought to be doing more of on shows like these. That, plus the surprise return of Ken Anderson, which was also really fun, made this a genuinely entertaining segment, even though the wrestling was nothing to talk about until JB took off like Superman. But there was one really frustrating segment here, and it belonged to Al Snow and Grado. He's the one who lost British Boot Camp 2, though you wouldn't know it by watching this. Al is acting like an intractable jerk so Grado can come out and be the big hometown hero, and this entire thing was completely bass-ackwards. If you didn't watch it, in which case I direct you to my reviews of the show at tnaasylum.com, link is down there, on British Boot Camp 2, scripted or not, Grado was a skin-peelingly annoying douchebag who disrespected the judges, didn't take the show seriously, and spent the entire process acting like an irritating, slovenly ass clown that I would rather gouge my eyes out than see on TNA programming ever again. And just because he's got some kind of big cult following in the UK apparently, Grado was rewarded for this behavior by having the entire show built around him like he was the center of the goddamn universe, to the point where the other much more likable contestants, including the guy who ultimately won the show, almost felt like an afterthought by comparison. And they tried to make Al Snow out to be the heel judge for not wanting Grado on the show and giving him a hard time, but it came off more like Al was just taking the show seriously and felt offended that Grado obviously didn't. And instead of seeming like some kind of lovable goofball, Grado was this idiot I wanted to punch in the fucking face and damn near ruined the show for me because he just wouldn't go away.
Urge to kill rising.
And now to culminate this little worked feud / publicity stunt of theirs, TNA want Al Snow to be the heel and Grado to be the face. There are not enough four-letter words in the world to accurately describe how I feel about that. Here's hoping that next week Al Snow puts Grado through a flaming table wrapped in electrified barbed wire and puts the fire out by pissing on it. And let that be the last time Grado ever darkens my screen.
Now forever leave my presence. Leave this ring, leave this building, leave the state. I think you should be exiled from the United States of America.
And finally, we have our tag team main event match with Angle and Lashley versus Joe and MVP. And it plays out exactly like everyone knew it would. The faces have a miscommunication, the heels win, and uh-oh, suddenly the faces aren't getting along anymore. The match was okay, but we all knew what the ending would be before it even started, and they didn't bother doing anything to try to surprise us. To be honest, I was hoping for more from this show. This is the Maximum Impact Tour. You expect them to pull out all the stops. Instead, most of the time it felt like the writers were on autopilot here for some reason. Maybe this was a setup for bigger, more interesting things to happen next week? Fingers crossed that those things include, but are not limited to, an appearance by Kaylee Ray, more thought put into the storylines, and a flaming table with Grado's name on it.